Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Grace Holland. Republicans' efforts to throw out 60,000 votes in the still undecided race for a state Supreme Court seat hit a speed bump on Wednesday night. Republican candidate Jefferson Griffin trails Democratic incumbent Justice Allison Riggs by fewer than 800 votes after several recounts, but a winner has not been named yet. Griffin's challenge in court could decide the race. We discussed the race and the legal wrangling in a recent episode, and WRAL state government reporter Will Doran is here with some new developments. Will, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me back.
Will, first off, for listeners who haven't been keeping track, tell us where the Supreme Court race stood on election night and why it's the last race to still not be certified.
Yeah, so this one has obviously been taking up a lot of attention recently. It's the last race in the whole country that hasn't been called from the 2024 elections. And on election night, the Republican Jefferson Griffin was ahead, not by a ton, about 10,000 votes out of 5.5 million. But as counties finished up counting all of the ballots, that changed, and Allison Riggs wound up winning the race by about 743 votes is where her lead stands now. But normally, after we finished the recounts and the recounts all showed that, yes, that the initial numbers were right and Riggs did win, normally that would be it. She would win the race. It would all be over. But this time, Jefferson Griffin has sued, and he's specifically asking for a court to step in and throw out the ballots of these 60,000 voters. So we are now just in the middle of that legal process and seeing how that is going to be handled by the courts.
And Griffin was hoping the state Supreme Court would rule on this. After all, the court is majority Republican, but they issued a somewhat surprising order late Wednesday. What did the justices say?
Yeah, so Griffin had wanted this to go just straight to the Supreme Court. Like you noted, it's a 5-2 Republican majority on the court, and so he was thinking, hey, I'll just get them to rule on this. But that's pretty rare. I mean, you don't get to just go straight to the Supreme Court. You have to go through trial usually. You have to go through the Court of Appeals usually, and that is what the court ordered on Wednesday. They said, hold on, we are not shooting you down entirely. We are going to stop the Board of Elections from doing anything in the meantime to say that Allison Riggs is the winner. But you do have to actually go through all the normal steps and go back to trial. So the bad news for Griffin here is that could add months to this challenge. And the bad news potentially for all of us. We are all, sitting here in a state where we don't really know who our Supreme Court justice is. There's only 7 justices on that court. So who holds, 1/7 of that power is a pretty important question.
Right. And what are the candidates saying about the order, given the amount of time that this could add to either one of them getting the job?
Yeah, well, Griffin has told me that he's not going to comment on this case. He believes that it is improper for a judge to comment on pending litigation. And he is a judge. He's on the State Court of Appeals, which is kind of the lower level below the Supreme Court. Allison Riggs has not been following that same philosophy. She has been commenting on this. Actually, on Thursday, she put out a lengthy statement saying that, she has been protecting people's voting rights for her whole career. In fact, before she was on the Supreme Court, she was a civil rights and voting rights attorney. And she said that she appreciated the court's order, forcing this to actually go to a trial where there can be evidence, because she believes the evidence will be in her favor. But she also is continuing her calls on Griffin to concede defeat and just end this challenge.
Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll hear why scholars are taking new interest in this case and why they're comparing North Carolina to Venezuela. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about the unresolved race for a seat on the state Supreme Court. So, Will, do these kinds of briefs carry any weight?
Yeah, so there was a brief, it's called an amicus brief, filed in the federal court version of this case, because there's both. It's happening in state court, it's also happening in federal court. And some scholars, people, at Harvard and Princeton, the University of Chicago, who study international politics and how basically democracies turn into dictatorships, wrote a brief, which they filed on Wednesday, and they said, hey, everything that we have seen in places like Hungary and like Turkey and like Venezuela, where things start out, you democratically elect your leader and then it slowly erodes into authoritarian dictatorships. They said, we're seeing a lot of the same things happening in North Carolina with this case. And so they said, we want to just put that on the record to raise flags about this. They said in a lot of these other countries, what we've seen is, one party captures basically all of the levers of government, the courts, and then can use that to make democracy less potent and to have, maybe the appearance of democracy, but then, use the power that they have in the courts and things like that to kind of undo what the voters want. And so, I think a lot of people might roll their eyes when they hear this and say, okay, obviously North Carolina is not Venezuela. We don't have a dictatorship here. But they said, look, we just want to say that this is dangerous. And I will say that what we've heard from national folks, national Democrats especially, is that they fear that North Carolina is sort of being used as a trial balloon almost for this strategy, that if it works here, the Republican Party could expand these same strategies to other states in future elections.
Really interesting set of circumstances there. A federal court of appeals is set to hear arguments in this case on Monday. What will you be watching for there, given, like you said, this test balloon nature?
Yes. So this is going up to the Fourth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals, and they are going to have attorneys for everybody there. The State Board of Elections, Allison Riggs, Jefferson Griffin, maybe some of these third-party groups like, these professors, and they're going to be able to have a chance to say their piece, but also for the judge to question them and to press them on, potential holes in their arguments. And so we don't expect the judge to make a ruling, but usually at these sorts of things, you can kind of figure out which way the judge is leaning. If he's really hammering one side more than the other, or sometimes the judges will even straight up say, I don't really think that you have an argument here. Try to convince me why I'm wrong. I don't know what the judge is going to say, but that's why we cover these things, to figure out what they'll be saying. So while this is moving forward in state court, it's also in federal court. It's very complicated to keep track of, but we are keeping track of it. So,
and how long do you expect all this legal maneuvering to go on? Does the ruling this week give us a better sense of how quickly this race will be resolved? I know you said it drags things out.
Yes, and it could also set things up for the U.S. Supreme Court to eventually weigh in on this, because the state Supreme Court, by dragging this out, sending it back to trial, potentially adding weeks or months to the process at the state level, means that the separate case at the federal level, which I mentioned, it's got oral arguments at the Court of Appeals on Monday, that's moving much faster now. So we could actually see this go all the way up to SCOTUS, and have the, in D.C., have the Supreme Court rule on basically who should even be in charge of making this decision. Because it's really rare that you have a case that's happening in both state court and federal court with the exact same arguments, because what happens if those courts rule differently? Right now, the state Supreme Court has told the State Board of Elections, hey, you cannot certify a winner, whether it's Riggs or Griffin, in this race at all until the entire process is done. It goes through trial, it goes through any appeals at the state court level, whatever. But what happens if the federal court of appeals comes in and says, hey, State Board of Elections, ignore that order and immediately certify Riggs or Griffin as the winner?
Right.
What do? They've got two different judges telling them completely opposite things. They're going to have to violate one of those court orders. So this could be the kind of thing where everyone kind of just wants it to go to the U.S. Supreme Court eventually, to figure out just who's in charge and who gets to make the final call. But that's a lot of speculation.
Right.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
And in the meantime, what does this do to the Supreme Court's ability the state Supreme Court, I should say, ability to do business before the court on other cases, since they're down a justice?
Yes, well, Riggs has actually technically stayed on the court. She is not participating in this case. She's recused herself from this one. But the state constitution says that, in case of like a contested election like this, you stay in your current job. So Griffin has stayed on the Court of Appeals. He's still hearing cases down there. And Riggs has stayed on the Supreme Court. She's hearing cases, except for this one, on the Supreme Court. So that's part of the reason why I think the state Supreme Court wasn't quite as worried about delaying this further by sending it back to trials. They're like, look, we're just kind of continuing the status quo. And, even if, Jefferson Griffin is eventually, found to be the winner, he will only likely have missed a few months. But in the meantime, it's a whole big mess. And I should note, too, it's not just, the judges themselves who are being impacted by this. It's the 60,000 voters who are being challenged by this. A lot of people are really concerned. We've done a ton of reporting on that. People can go back to our website, on WRAL.com, go find the NC Capital section. You'll find an FAQ there that I've written that has links to go find if you're, one of the voters who's been challenged. We've got tons of stories on this race if you really want to get into the weeds and check out the back and forth on it. It's something that we've been covering a lot and we'll definitely continue to.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Will. And that's WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran for the latest on the state Supreme Court race and a breakdown of the court cases around it. As Will said, go to the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. Thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us a part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. That's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.